This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. I've just returned from a brief holiday. First time I've been away in 2.5 years, staying in a cottage on the edge of the Tararua Mountains in the Wairarapa, just a few hours away from where we live. I was starting to feel very overwhelmed with the acceleration of events and my inability to keep up with it all, especially with my health only allowing me to concentrate for short periods of time. And then came the Christchurch massacre. I really needed a chance to get away and to reflect on things. That's not quite how things turned out, however. I felt practically unable to do anything, especially think. Apart from anything, it was very hot. I experienced a heat which I'd not felt in our cooler house all summer. We were both woken up by heat after midnight. It was hotter at that time of the night than when we went to bed and when we got up in the morning. We got up to find the full moon surrounded by a red halo and by clouds that we have only seen once before in our lives, just a few weeks ago in January. So we're now a few weeks away from Easter, which was a time when we would normally go tramping, hiking in the nearby Tararuas. We would have been in sleeping bags with silk inner linings, and the conditions would have been cool and pleasant. However, not while we were away. To experience such heat was an unpleasant revelation. And the other thing was the insects, or rather the lack of them. During the 24 hours that I was there, I saw a solitary bee, a couple of daytime moths, and some sort of solitary beetle. There was no sign of nocturnal moths which would fly around, drawn to the light that I remember from my childhood, or of biting insects. So as I've just said, this is a marked contrast to when I was younger and one would have to clean the dead bugs off the windscreen after driving at night. There seemed very little sign of life, and what is stranger is there's probably more diversity of insect life and bird life in our suburban garden than in the back blocks close to the forested Tararua range. But just like the geoengineer skies above us, no one seems to notice, or very few. Another shock for me was my own health. That was terrible for the entire time I was away. Getting away from computer and Wi-Fi didn't seem to revive me, and I found myself unable to engage with anything very much, and certainly not the thinking and reflection that I was intending. One line of thought that did come to me was about the nature of right versus left. The left, which I've identified with through almost the entirety of my life, has had its assumptions of both social and economic progress and justice for all, especially for the vulnerable. It's very laudable. But, as I've said before, in the current era in which we are seeing a rapid decline of habitat for humans and other species on an overpopulated world, the end of growth and problems wherever you look, plastics in the ocean, peak oil, deforestation, and the extension of species at an unprecedented rate, etc., etc., and a world moving towards war and tyranny. So in that context, it's very, very hard to talk about human progress. In the midst of this, the left, especially the liberal left, which could be described as the extreme centre in my mind, is in total denial. You can't even talk about climate change unless you start with solutions. So you adjust the description of all problems to fit the narrative. Now that is something that I call lying. With the right, You can't even talk about climate change. They have a more crude form of blanket denial, which the left hates, mostly because the globalist solutions and the new economy don't factor into it at all. For the first time ever, I'm seeing opposition to the war coming from the right, where the liberal left these days embraces war against Syria, against Venezuela, wherever. They embrace the corrupt swamp of Washington, D.C., the CIA, the FBI, etc., what we call the deep state, which they used to, in the past, at least pretend to hate. They describe things quite accurately, the right describe things quite accurately when it comes to, say, the migrant crisis in Europe and elsewhere. But really they miss the wood for the trees. They're able to describe, but are unable to divine the essence of the problem, that we're closer than we know to what I might call peak humanity. It's all downhill from here more quickly than almost anyone is prepared to admit. But we have a third group, a very small group of people that are more or less free of the right versus left paradigm and are mostly systems thinkers who are able to various degrees to join the dots and recognize what is happening to humanity. I began this process of transitioning to this way of thinking through my association with Mike Rupert and as well as in subsequent years. Not only Mike, but just about everyone that I look up to is now described as right or even far right. This includes people like Dmitry Orlov, James Howard Kunstler, and everyone practically in the peak oil movement, except for those who have jumped to the Liberal Democrat camp. And I can think of at least one name there. Anyone who tells the truth about the war on Syria, Russiagate, security state, the list goes on. And recently it was a shock for me to find on a Wikipedia search that many of the people that I look up to from the past, from Carl Jung to Joseph Campbell of The Power of Myth and Richard Adams, author of Watership Down, are variously described as crypto-fascist, Nazi, anti-Semite, racist or misogynist. Just choose your epithet. But then, where are we when some great works of art in America, and I think of To Kill a Mockingbird immediately, are described in this manner, and there are calls for their banning? We live in an age of the destruction of art and culture, of religion, the family, in favour of anything that acts as a glue that holds society together. So I have much in common with, in this sort of sense, with the Conservatives. And that would take us back to the impossibility of human progress, if that's what it can be described as, in a world and a society that is devolving, not evolving. In the time left to humans, in frightening times, we need as much social glue as we can muster, but instead of that, it's all being taken away from us by forces that I can only describe these days as demonic. It's no wonder that people everywhere are confused and angry, above all angry. And I think it's designed that way. It's designed to divide us and make us fight each other so that they can bring in something in its wake. So that brings me to the Christchurch shooting. Every time one of these shootings happens, I find myself wanting to believe a more straightforward narrative of a lone gunman or whatever, but every time I'm shaken out of my unreality by some evidence or other, which always turns out to be of the same nature. So that says something about me, that I want and what I want to believe, and it's certainly not false flags or complicated scenarios involving foreign intelligence agencies. So I was sent the live stream from the killer Brenton Tarrant within a couple of hours of the news of the shooting. So although my first reaction was of numb shock, a night's sleep brought some clarity. And I recollected the video and realised that it lacked anything that you would expect to see in a mass murder carried out with a machine gun. Like blood. Lots of blood. And what blood there was seemed pretty unconvincing to me. A pile of bodies lying together, all with their faces away from the camera. No blood, no bullet holes, no nothing. And this was reinforced in photos that I saw on Facebook this morning, with a picture that I'd not seen before of blood-stained carpet from the Hagley Park mosque, and where the massacre had happened. And then there was the empty floor in the video that's now been banned. The other thing that bothered me was an interview shown on TVNZ that I managed to catch, where a Muslim lady revealed that Tarrant had given notice of his intentions 3 days in advance, and that this information had been given to the police, who then took in excess of 40 minutes to arrive at the scene, which was at most 10 minutes from police headquarters. And then the hospital was only 2 minutes drive from the Hagley Park Mosque. So since then there's been lots more evidence come in, which opens the whole narrative open to question. There are a few things that I can say for certain. The first is that it was a very genuine and awful mass killing at the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch. The second is that as far as a record of killing the video that was live streamed is not what it would seem. This video appears to be some amalgam of genuine material and other stuff that is completely bogus, fake. Why then would the authorities be so anxious to remove all traces of a video which seems to have as much in common with a video game as anything, something that is very difficult to do, even within this country? Which is why I was shocked, but not in the least surprised, by news that on both sides of the Tasman, governments are asking for regulation of the internet so that their citizens cannot get to the truth. That is the end game. There are still lots more anomalies that have been discovered and still waiting to be discovered. Apart from what I have done already, which may be too much for my own good, sorry, I kind of So sorry, I lost my way there. Which is why I was shocked but not in the least surprised by news that on both sides of the Tasman, governments are asking for the regulation of the internet so that their citizens cannot get to the truth. There are lots more anomalies that have been discovered and waiting to be discovered. Apart from what I have done already, which may be too much for my own good, I do not want to get too far in speculating in what happened. There's such a wealth of information and disinformation out there that it's very hard to see the wood for the trees. Apart from describing what we know for certain, I'm unwilling to get into jumping to conclusions about false flags, partially because they're so misunderstood. That opens one up to attack. Also, that is the direction, although that's the direction at which the evidence seems to be pointing, and certainly not saying that it's all about gun control or the like. One of the emotions that I've felt around this is fear. Fear and consternation that this should be visited on this previously peaceful country that was once better known for its flightless bird, the kiwi, for rugby football, and 60 million sheep. That this happened in my city, Christchurch, already traumatised by the earthquakes and the subsequent disaster capitalism that has been visited upon it. I cannot help thoughts about expecting a rude knock at the door or my access to information and the internet taken away suddenly, and already large numbers of people have suffered from inability to access certain sites, like Zero Hedge, for instance. Given the headlines from just today, with calls for a regulated internet and threats of revenge against New Zealand from both Erdogan of Turkey and ISIS, all of this puts this isolated little country in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, into the centre of things. Fear has taken hold of the country, and when there is fear, people lose their ability to keep a cool head and think rationally. As if it wasn't happening already, especially since the elections in the United States, this is going to destroy friendships and relationships, and the people who are looking a bit further will be vilified in a certain way that is similar to the treatment meted out to conscientious objectors in the world wars of the 20th century. And I'm sure that we're going to see a nation of snitches and informers very quickly, and there are already signs of that. An earlier sign of this intolerance for me was when the mayor of Lower Hutt was crowing about the creation of new sports arena in the Hutt Valley and how wonderful everything was. And I sent him a message lamenting the loss over 12 years of all of our vegetable shops, 3 of them I think, all of our butchers, our local FPOS machine, and many other things. And then he came back. This is someone who had a speaking relationship with. He knows who I am. He came back with a clearly angry response. He said, "If you don't like it here, you can move somewhere else." Now I need to think about this blog that I've been engaged with every day almost for 8 years. I no longer have the wellness or the energy to keep up with anything like the frequency or intensity that I have in the past. Quite apart from that, I am not at all sure how long it'll be possible to speak out on anything remotely in a free manner or remotely free manner. So my intentions are to step back and post less frequently than I have before and limit myself to what I think is most important. That means I can't possibly keep up with the main news of the day. With the quickening of events, the censorship, along with major health concerns, that is becoming less impossible. Those are my feelings at the time. Everything is subject to change. Anyway, that's enough from me. This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under.